Good evening and welcome to the NDTV Dialogues. Tonight we move away from political campaigns and the slugfest over history. We focus instead on the idea of India. What are we seeing in the current context? Are we seeing a battle between different ideas of India? Are we looking at different interpretations of a grand unifying idea? Are we looking not at an idea but really more about implementation, about issues of delivery and governance? Joining me tonight on this is a distinguished panel. I'm joined by Kapil Sibal, Professor Sunil Khilnani, Ashok, Malik and Dr. Ananya, Vajpeyi. Thank you all very much for coming in tonight. Professor Khilnani, over the years the idea of India necessarily changes and in many ways it stayed the same. In this current context, what do you see as the conflict today or the political debate today over this? Is it about different ideas? Is it about, as I said, an interpretation of one idea?
I think the way it's often portrayed is a debate about different ideas and clashing ideas, but actually I think if you look at it, it really is about interpretations of this more singular idea, which itself has allowed a wide variety of positions within it. So even if you look at the current arguments about history, there's actually an agreement about who are the important figures in our history. There's a question of difference of interpretation, difference of nuance, who is more important as compared with someone else. But there is an agreement that these are the figures, whether it's Patel or Nehru or whoever, that these are the figures who are the makers of our history. It's not a turn to more marginal figures. It's not a turn to eccentrics or radicals or revolutionaries or more violent figures. So in that sense, I think there is a broad agreement about what the contours of the idea of India is today, and you know, one of the aspects of that is that it's an open idea, it's a revisable idea, it's an idea that we are willing to be persuaded to believe in, rather than forced to sort of believing in. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it's not an ideology, it's an idea, and I think the difference there is that it's not a ready-made, packaged version of what India is or what Indian nationalism is or what Indian patriotism is. It's a set of principles to which I think all of the actors today in our political space are broadly committed. Again, there are differences of nuance, differences of interpretation, but there is basic agreement, and there's basic agreement also about what are the important figures and moments in our history. Mm-hmm. There's disagreement about whether one matters more than another, whether this episode was played correctly or not. That's fine, that's normal in any open democratic society. But no one is trying to paint a totally alternative account of what India is, or a totally revolutionary account. So I think in that sense, there is a broad consensus about what kind of a idea we all believe in.
Mr. Sibal, some criticism people have made of an idea of India which we all broadly follow is that it's straining at its seams. In some sense, when you look at aspirations, you look at regional aspirations, you look at different voices emerging, whether it's of different states. We've seen more and more often that the voices of states are so much more important at the center as well. Do you think we actually need to look at redefining what we mean by an idea of India today? How would you see it?
Well, quite frankly, I think the debate has been somewhat short on what the idea of India is. I don't think that the kind of debate that I have seen in the last few months, there is any alternative vision of India that is placed before the people of India. And I think that television plays a very important role there. You have sound bites, quick sound bites about personalities in the past. What India is concerned about is the future, and the future is fast changing. Nobody is really talking about what the challenges of the future are, where India should be in the context of those challenges, what policies should be put in place, what ideology must be followed in the context of those policies, and how India must move forward in a highly competitive global environment. I don't see any of that in our public discourse. I think history is not going to end personalities and talking about personalities and differing on personalities and their roles in the past will have anything to do as to how we must deal with the future.
What would you see as a future idea of
Well, somebody
India?
should tell us, how do we educate our young? Somebody should tell us we need by 2022, when India is 75, 500 million skilled people. How do we actually skill them? How do we take care of the enormous problems of healthcare delivery systems? Since we are a young nation, and by 2020 the average age of an Indian would be 29, how do we actually empower our workforce? And what are the kind of skills that are required? What should be our economic policy, and what should be our policy in the context of the global economic complexity that is emerging? And the fact that we are part of the global economic system, how do we deal with that competitiveness? How do we deal with issues of security? How do we deal with most of our services are going to be delivered on the net, right? So how do we deal with a new phenomenon of communication where there are very important players that are going to play out over the years? Do we have a policy? Does anybody have an idea on it? Is anybody talking about it? I'm afraid the past is irrelevant. The contribution of great men in the past is wholly irrelevant to the challenges for the future.
Dr. Vajpeyi?
Well, I mean, as a historian, I obviously do believe that there's a lot to learn from the past and from, our recent history during, let's say, just even the 20th century, when a lot of the ideas that defined us as a nation were put into play, articulated for the first time, and then to various degrees realized or not realized, right? But I do agree with what the minister said, that the concerns of the future are quite pressing, and with such a large population and with all kinds of potential crises relating to the environment, relating to our demographics, relating to the way in which resources are distributed, and very, very large questions which have not been fully addressed, of violence, of social inequality, of gender imbalance, and so on. If we don't increasingly pay attention to how we actually solve those problems in not just the distant future but in the near future, then all the legacy that we have and all the gains that we have made, and we have made considerable gains, I think, from 100 years ago when we were deep in the throes of colonialism. If we don't reorient our sights very quickly to what's coming and to what we need to deal with in the coming decades, then all of that great inheritance would be for nothing.
Too much noise in the discourse currently. But Ashok, Malik, if you had to actually distill perhaps the ideas that we see being thrown around us, Mr. Sibal makes the point that where are we seeing the actual solutions for the future? Do you see a glimmer of hope there that we are actually looking at two alternatives now which are being pitched to us as we head into election season?
I don't think we're looking at two alternatives, because I don't think that just one or two ideas of India. At the simplest, most basic level, there are 1.2 billion Indians and there are 1.2 billion ideas of India. However, a vast majority of these ideas perhaps approximate each other. And if I could borrow a term from statistics, there's probably a mode idea of India, which is the most commonly occurring variable in a series. There are also outlier ideas of India, legitimate in their own way, but there is a broad mainstream idea of India. This most commonly occurring idea of India flows from the principles underpinning our constitution, not from every letter, semicolon and paragraph, which can be debated, but broadly the principles, or what the court once called the basic structure perhaps, or at least the principles behind the constitution, which was a remarkably liberal document and which has served us well and will continue to serve us well. I don't think anyone is seriously challenging the validity of that constitution or the framework it has given us. But that framework requires constant updating. Right now, 2014 or 2009, or call it what you will, India is at the intersection of 3 or 4 forces it has not encountered in, say, 55 or 65. One, urbanization, the most rapid urbanization in our history. Second, demography, a population that has never been so young and so large. this had an impact on, in fact, the election of 2009 to the benefit of Mr. Sibal's party. It will have an impact on 2014, 2019, I dare say 2024 as well. Who benefits is immaterial. That apart, Indian society, various aspects of Indian society, civil society, business, families, have evolved and changed dramatically in the past few decades. The Indian state, and this is not a criticism of any one government, but the Indian state has not evolved and changed as quickly. It has to keep up. Third, if you look at the relationship between the states and the center, the federal government or the union government, the constitution divides powers between them in a particular manner, which it did in 1950. Perhaps that needs to be relooked, and perhaps those three lists have to be rejigged. But all of that can be done within the framework that the constitution gives us. We don't have to challenge or rewrite this constitution. That framework and that basic idea of India is still there.